It was supposed to be a weekend getaway, a peaceful camping trip in the wild beauty of the Adirondacks. But for Caleb MacArthur and Lily Harper, 17, their escape into the remote wilderness would end in mystery, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions, a shattered family, and a chilling discovery that no one saw coming. After their families learned that Caleb and Lily had deliberately deceived them about their plans, the search for them spiraled into a nightmare. As the days turned into weeks, the wilderness held its silence until a chance discovery led investigators deep into the heart of the Adirondacks, where a sinister secret waited to be uncovered. What happened to these two teens? And what dark force in the forest was determined to keep their secrets hidden? Before we dive deeper into today's chilling story, a huge thank you to all of our returning viewers. Your support means the world to us, and we couldn't do this without you. If you're new here and haven't hit that subscribe button yet, what are you waiting for? We've got more spine-tingling stories just like this one, and we wouldn't want you to miss out. But hey, if you're not ready to subscribe, we'd love to hear from you. Let us know why in the comments below. Your thoughts matter, and we're all ears. Now let's get back to the mystery. Before we unravel the chilling mystery that surrounds Caleb MacArthur and Lily Harper, we need to take a moment to step into their world. Two 17-year-olds, deeply in love, and ready to experience the world together. Caleb and Lily had always shared a bond that felt like it could conquer anything. Their love was young, wild, and free, filled with the excitement of a new adventure on the horizon. Their plan was simple: a weekend camping trip in the wild, untouched beauty of Adirondack Park, New York. A perfect place to escape, surrounded by towering trees, crystal-clear lakes, and the peaceful solitude of nature. But while their families were imagining them in a well-known, family-friendly campground, Caleb and Lily had other plans that would soon lead them into the heart of the wilderness, far beyond the paths of any typical camper. Their families believed they were heading to the safe, popular campground, a place where rangers patrolled and families gathered. But Caleb and Lily had intentionally deceived their parents. Instead of the bustling, well-lit campground, they ventured deep into the Adirondacks, to an isolated corner of the park where the forest swallowed everything whole. It was a place that few dared to visit, a place where the silence of nature could both comfort and consume them. They sent a single selfie before they entered the wilderness, capturing the last moment they were truly part of the world they knew. In the photo, Caleb, with his maroon hoodie and glasses, grinned slightly at the camera. Lily, in her cream-colored knit beanie, smiled beside him, her hair spilling from beneath it. Behind them stood a rock shelter, a sign they were already far from civilization, heading into the wild unknown. The picture was meant to be a simple moment of fun, a keepsake of their time together, but it became the last proof that Caleb and Lily had ever existed in the world their parents knew. It was their final connection to reality before they disappeared into the depths of the Adirondacks. This selfie would be the last time they were seen, and it would take their families and authorities days to realize they were missing. By then, the wilderness had already claimed them, its vastness and unyielding terrain leaving nothing but questions. And that one final snapshot, sent with excitement and a sense of freedom, would hold the only clue to their whereabouts. As the hours passed, the anxiety in Evelyn MacArthur's chest only grew. Caleb and Lily had promised to return by Sunday evening, but as the sunset faded into darkness, it became clear that something wasn't right. Evelyn had tried calling Caleb's phone several times, only to be met with an endless series of voicemails. At first, she thought it was just a simple issue, a dead battery, or perhaps the teens had just lost track of time. Maybe they were running late, or perhaps Caleb's Jeep had gotten a flat tire on one of the winding roads leading to the campground. But the longer she waited, the more the unease gnawed at her. By the time 6 p.m. arrived, Evelyn couldn't ignore the feeling in her gut any longer. It was no longer a simple inconvenience, it was a growing sense of panic. She couldn't wait any longer, and her mind raced with worst-case scenarios. What if they had broken down on a remote stretch of road, or worse, gotten lost in the dense Adirondack wilderness? Every moment was becoming more critical, and she had to do something. Without hesitation, Evelyn grabbed her keys and made her way to the car. The drive from her home to the campground was a winding, isolated route, with few signs of life beyond the occasional vehicle. The road seemed even longer than usual, and the silence of the empty landscape felt oppressive. The darkening skies made everything feel more ominous, but Evelyn pushed the fear aside. Caleb was resourceful, she told herself. Lily was smart. Everything would be fine. When she finally reached the campground, the parking lot was nearly empty, with only a few families packing up for the season. The check-in booth was still staffed, but as she approached the ranger, her gut tightened. She explained the situation, voice shaking with the growing concern she tried to suppress. The ranger calmly checked the registration logs, flipping through pages of names. His finger stopped as he read aloud, Caleb MacArthur? Lily Harper. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. The ranger's expression changed, his brow furrowing. He looked up at Evelyn with a puzzled expression, confirming her worst fear. They're not here. They never checked in. Evelyn's world seemed to slow down as the reality hit her like a blow to the stomach. They lied. Caleb and Lily had never intended to be at the campground. They hadn't gone to the safe, family-friendly site they told their parents about. They had deceived everyone. The teens weren't where they were supposed to be, they were somewhere far deeper into the Adirondack Park, a place where help could be miles away. Evelyn's heart raced as she stood frozen, trying to process what this meant. Suddenly the words felt heavy. She could barely comprehend the enormity of what she was hearing. They had gone into the wilderness, far from the safety of a well-traveled path. The realization sank in, this wasn't just an innocent mistake. This was something more. Something had gone terribly wrong, and the vast, unforgiving wilderness was now their only companion. Evelyn turned quickly, her mind racing with thoughts of where they might have gone and how she had no idea how to find them in such an expansive, isolated region. The unknowns, the wilderness, the isolation, the distance choked the breath from her chest. It was now clear. Caleb and Lily had gone off the grid, leaving no trace behind. In the shadow of those towering trees and hidden valleys, their fate now lay in the hands of the forest itself. Time was slipping away. Every passing second, every minute felt heavier than the last. As the New York State Police took action, Evelyn MacArthur and Melanie Harper, Lily's mother, knew that they had just made the hardest call of their lives, reporting their children as missing. The frantic energy from the moment they dialed 911 had now transformed into a quiet, suffocating fear. The Adirondack wilderness was vast, and the window to find Caleb and Lily alive was closing fast. The authorities moved quickly, the 48-hour window now hanging like a ticking bomb over their heads. In this critical time frame, the chances of finding them alive were at their peak. But with each hour that passed without a breakthrough, that chance slipped further away. Evelyn's stomach twisted with the realization that she wasn't just waiting for the teens to come home. She was waiting to know whether her son would ever return. As the search teams infiltrated the Adirondacks, Evelyn's heart raced with every moment they were out of sight. The woods, thick with untamed forest and rugged mountains, felt like a suffocating, living entity, a place that would swallow anyone who ventured too far. The searchers moved like ghosts, their progress slow, uncertain, and grueling. The land felt indifferent to their pain. K-9 teams barked into the silence, but the scent trails grew colder with each passing step, as if the wilderness itself was actively hiding its secrets. Helicopters flew overhead, blades cutting the thick air, but the dense forest canopy below seemed to mock the effort, hiding everything from view. There was no sign of life, no sign of Caleb and Lily, just miles and miles of endless trees and mountains. The sun was fading, and Evelyn felt the weight of each minute like a stone in her chest. Melanie too was breaking inside, her thoughts spiraling. What if it was too late? What if they were already too far gone? The wilderness was their enemy now, a place so unforgiving that it didn't care about her daughter's smile, or the love they'd shared in the warmth of their homes. Every new lead that came in felt like a fleeting hope, only to vanish into the air. Every step taken felt like it was in vain. The searchers pressed on, their faces grim with the knowledge that the stakes had never been higher, and the hope was fading. And while the search was growing more desperate, Evelyn was left alone with her fear, heart pounding, imagining the worst and hoping for a miracle. Hours stretched into a seemingly endless night. The search for Caleb and Lily had ground to a halt, and with every passing moment, hope seemed to flicker just a little more dimly. But then, just as the investigation seemed to plateau, a breakthrough came from a place no one had expected. Caleb's uncle, James MacArthur, was standing in a quiet room, his eyes clouded with worry, when he suddenly remembered something, a small, seemingly insignificant detail that could change everything. James recalled that just before Caleb had left for the trip, he had borrowed a specialized GPS unit from him. It wasn't just any GPS. This was an older, rugged handheld model, the kind used by hikers and hunters deep in the woods, perfect for navigating the remote corners of the Adirondacks where cell service was non-existent. The kind of place no one would expect teenagers to venture, let alone lie about going to. James's memory was their first glimmer of hope, a small thread of possibility in the otherwise impenetrable web of silence. The police immediately seized the device, their fingers trembling with anticipation. They knew this could be the key to finding the teens, to understanding where they had really gone. But what they uncovered was more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. When the police plugged the GPS into a computer to extract its data, they found the coordinates Caleb had programmed just days before leaving, a series of precise, calculated points that led deep into the heart of Adirondack Park, far beyond the confines of the safe, family-friendly campground he had promised his parents. These coordinates didn't point to a destination near the campground, no, they pointed to a remote, isolated area, miles away from civilization, a place where even seasoned outdoorsmen might hesitate to go. The realization was immediate and gut-wrenching. Caleb and Lily had intentionally sought seclusion, driven by something far more compelling than simply a love for nature. They didn't just get lost, they chose to disappear into the wilderness, beyond anyone's reach, into a place where danger was hidden in plain sight. For a moment, the discovery hung heavy in the air, an unsettling truth that sent chills through the officers and families alike. It was a truth no one was ready to accept. The teens had lied, and now that lie had led them into the darkest part of the park. This wasn't just a harmless adventure gone wrong. This was something much more sinister. They hadn't just gotten lost, they had gone off the grid, intentionally heading into a world where help was far out of reach. The implications of the GPS data were terrifying. It meant they were intentionally isolated, cut off from any chance of immediate rescue. The police scrambled to reframe their search strategy, now fully aware that they were looking for two teenagers who had deliberately disappeared into a wild, unforgiving expanse, a place where every step deeper into the woods could be their last. What had been thought of as a simple missing persons case was rapidly morphing into something much darker. Evelyn and Melanie's hearts sank as they processed the new reality. Their children had deliberately sought the very thing they feared most: seclusion, isolation, and danger. This wasn't just a missed campsite anymore. It was a carefully planned escape into a place that was vast, unpredictable, and deadly. The police knew they had to act fast, But how could they possibly cover such an expansive area? And what if Caleb and Lily were already too far gone? Every minute felt like an eternity now. The pressure was mounting, and with it, the suffocating fear that perhaps the Adirondacks were already keeping them in its cold, unyielding grip. The search had just taken a terrifying new turn. The moment the GPS coordinates were confirmed, everything shifted. What had once seemed like a straightforward missing persons case had now become something much more complex. The search teams, fueled by a new sense of urgency, quickly changed course. The teens weren't lost near a campground. They had intentionally ventured into the depths of the Adirondack wilderness, far beyond the reach of any immediate help. The coordinates led them straight into the heart of the Adirondack Park, a vast, untamed wilderness that stretched for thousands of square miles. The dense forests, jagged mountain peaks, and sheer isolation made it a place where even the most seasoned explorers could get lost. But for the searchers, the challenge was far more immediate and personal now. Caleb and Lily had deliberately chosen this treacherous path, and every step they took from here could bring them further into danger. The terrain was relentless. The dense thickets of trees seemed to close in around the searchers, each step feeling more like an effort to push back the forest itself. The underbrush was thick, tangled with sharp brambles and fallen branches, making every move feel like an exhausting battle. The ground was uneven and rocky, with steep hills rising abruptly, blocking the view of anything ahead. It was physically draining just to move through it, each advance slowing down as if the forest was pushing back against them. Even the weather seemed to conspire against the teams. The Adirondacks were known for their unpredictable climate, and now, as the search teams pressed forward, a sudden shift in the weather added another layer of complication. A cold front rolled in, the wind picking up and sending rain pouring down in sheets. The forest became even more treacherous as the mud turned to slippery slush, making the path forward uncertain. The searchers, drenched and exhausted, knew that Caleb and Lily could be anywhere in this vast wilderness. The area they had entered was so expansive, and the vastness made it seem like the teens could be hidden 100 miles away in any direction. Every tree, every rock could be hiding their whereabouts. And the silence in the forest was suffocating, broken only by the distant sounds of cracking branches and rushing wind, as if the wilderness itself was keeping its secrets. As they pushed deeper into the park, the sense of urgency grew. Evelyn and Melanie's hearts ached, knowing that Caleb and Lily were somewhere out there lost in a wilderness that offered no mercy. They were no longer simply missing, they had intentionally isolated themselves in a place where survival would be a battle against the elements, the terrain, and their own fears. The discovery that the teens had ventured into seclusion was now undeniable. This wasn't a case of a simple mistake. Caleb and Lily had wanted to be here. They had chosen to disappear into a place where help might never reach them. The search had turned from finding them near a familiar, safe campground to a desperate scramble across an unforgiving expanse, knowing that time was slipping away with every passing second. Every searcher felt the weight of that reality. They knew the challenges were greater than ever. But even as they battled the physical and emotional toll of the search, the adrenaline kept them moving forward. The pressure was mounting, and the wilderness was closing in on them just as it had on Caleb and Lily. The teens had been out there for days, and each minute that passed brought them closer to the chilling possibility that the wilderness might have already taken them. As the search teams pressed on, the true magnitude of what they were up against began to sink in. This wasn't just about finding two teenagers, it was about finding them before the unforgiving forest could swallow them whole. We're deep into this mystery, and the tension is only rising. If you're feeling the weight of this story, don't forget to show your support. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss another chilling episode like this one. We've got more twists and turns ahead, and you won't want to miss what comes next. If you're already a subscriber, thank you for your unwavering support. You're the reason we can keep bringing you these stories. For those still watching but haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Join our community. And if you're still unsure, let us know why in the comments below. We value your thoughts, and we're always listening. Now let's get back to the investigation, because the truth is getting closer, and so is the danger. Hours of searching had passed. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and the weight of unanswered questions. Henry Woods, a quiet geological surveyor accustomed to working alone in the Adirondacks, had been mapping a remote section of the park when he stumbled upon something that would change everything. He had ventured deeper than usual, far from any established trails, when he noticed something out of place. At first, it seemed like just another patch of disturbed ground, a clearing overgrown with moss and fallen leaves. But as he moved closer, his eyes locked on an old, faded yellow tent, sagging under the weight of the forest's relentless assault. The fabric was torn in places, stained by time and exposure, hanging loosely as if abandoned long ago. Henry's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just an ordinary campsite. It felt wrong, abandoned in a way that was almost too complete. There was no sign of life, no flickering fire, no cooking pots or signs of human activity beyond the bare essentials. His breath caught as he carefully approached. As he surveyed the site, his gaze moved to the makeshift fire pit, a circle of damp rocks scattered with cold ash and half-burned remnants. Nearby, scattered gear lay discarded: a sleeping bag, a torn jacket, and several crushed water bottles. But there was something more. A small, brightly colored candy wrapper, its vibrant logo half visible beneath the dirt, but unmistakable. The wrapper was unmistakably familiar: a Stony Patch Edibles package, the same brand Caleb and Lily had been seen with in their last selfie. The discovery struck like a blow to Henry's chest. He froze, the implication settling heavily in the air. This was their campsite. Caleb and Lily had been here, but the deeper question remained: what had happened after they set up camp? Henry's mind raced, his instincts on high alert. The stillness of the site felt unnerving, too quiet, too final. Had it been an accident? The thought lingered, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was at play. Had the teens been caught off guard by something? The disarray of their belongings, the abandoned camp, seemed to suggest they hadn't left on their own terms. The candy wrapper burned like a symbol of innocence, but it raised so many questions. Why would they abandon everything so suddenly? Why was there no sign of struggle, no immediate clue that something had gone horribly wrong right here? The discovery only deepened the mystery. As Henry stood silently, the weight of his discovery pressing in on him, a sickening feeling twisted in his stomach. Had Caleb and Lily made a mistake in the woods? Or had foul play been involved? The idea that someone else might have been here, that something sinister might have happened, was now impossible to ignore. With a trembling hand, Henry radioed for the authorities, his voice tight with anxiety. The discovery of the campsite wasn't just another piece of evidence. It was a turning point, a moment that brought the investigation into the realm of dark possibilities. Caleb and Lily weren't just missing, they had been here, and now the question was, what had happened after they disappeared into the woods? The discovery of the campsite had opened more doors than it had closed, and the answers were slipping farther out of reach. Investigators combed through the site with grim determination, hoping for a clue that would unlock the mystery of what had happened to Caleb and Lily. But nothing could have prepared them for what they found next. Nestled beneath a pile of discarded items, half buried in the dirt, was a small, crinkled package. The once bright colors were now dulled by dirt and wear, but the logo was unmistakable: Stony Patch Edibles. The candy wrapper, familiar in its vibrant hues, sat like a silent witness to the teens' ill-fated journey. This wasn't just a piece of trash, it was the piece of evidence that would unravel everything. Caleb and Lily had brought high-potency cannabis edibles with them, And now the realization hit like a hammer. The teens had likely consumed the edibles before venturing into the deep, unforgiving wilderness of the Adirondacks. The question wasn't if they were intoxicated, but how impaired they had been when they made their way deeper into the woods. The implications of this discovery were devastating. Had their impaired judgment led to their downfall? The teens, in an altered state, could have easily made a mistake stepping off a trail, slipping near a ravine, or wandering further from the campsite, unaware of the dangers lurking just beyond the trees. The wilderness, wild and untamed, had no mercy for those who weren't fully aware of their surroundings. But there was a darker possibility. What if the edibles weren't the only cause of their disappearance? What if the presence of the Stony Patch edibles pointed to something even more sinister? The idea of the teens wandering into a dangerous situation because of impaired decision-making was one thing. But the idea that they could have encountered a third party, someone who was waiting for them, or someone who had already been watching, crept into the minds of the investigators like a shadow. The more the drug evidence settled in, the more unsettling it became. Caleb and Lily weren't just teens on a camping trip, they were experimenting with something that could easily cloud their judgment. They had ventured into an environment that demanded focus, survival instincts, and awareness, and instead, they had brought with them something that could push them past their limits. The possibility that they had been vulnerable, lost, confused, and easy targets was chilling. As the investigators examined the Stony Patch edibles package more closely, it became clear. The teens had been in a dangerous state when they entered this unforgiving world. This wasn't just a weekend adventure gone wrong, it was a perfect storm of poor decisions, isolation, and a deadly mix of vulnerability and curiosity. The teens had stepped into the wilderness with more than just backpacks, they had carried substance that clouded their perception of danger, and now it was clear that their intoxication may have led them to take risks they would never have taken otherwise. Evelyn and Melanie, waiting for updates back at base, could barely process what they were hearing. It felt like everything they had believed about their children was crumbling. Caleb and Lily, despite their intelligence and their shared love for the wilderness, had been drawn into the reckless world of experimentation, a world that had now swallowed them whole. What had started as an innocent getaway had quickly spiraled into a series of decisions that led them to a place where survival wasn't guaranteed. The drug evidence didn't just suggest a lapse in judgment, it suggested that the teens had been caught in something much darker. Was it an accident, or had their curiosity and reckless choices led them into the hands of something or someone more dangerous than they could have ever imagined? As the investigation took unexpected turns, the tension between the two mothers reached a breaking point. The emotional toll of the search was starting to weigh heavily on Evelyn MacArthur and Melanie Harper, who had both been clinging to the hope that their children would return. But as the days stretched on, that hope began to fray at the edges. What was once a shared grief between the two families began to crack, revealing a deep divide that neither woman could ignore. Evelyn, always a mother who defended her son with fierce loyalty, couldn't accept the idea that Caleb's decisions were to blame for what had happened. She knew her son, he was intelligent, responsible, and level-headed. Caleb had been a thoughtful planner, not the kind of kid who would recklessly wander into danger. To Evelyn, it wasn't Caleb who was to blame, it was something outside his control, something that had led him and Lily into that treacherous wilderness. She held on to the belief that foul play was involved, something or someone had interfered with their plans. Perhaps it had been the smuggling ring or someone hiding in the woods, waiting for an opportunity. In her mind, the wilderness was the enemy, not her son's choices. Caleb was victimized, and that was the narrative she refused to let go of. But Melanie, whose heart was filled with anger and guilt, could not see it the same way. Her thoughts were consumed with the decision Caleb had made to take Lily into that wilderness, a decision that now seemed like a dangerous gamble. To her, Caleb's reckless actions were the direct cause of Lily's disappearance. Why did he take her there? She asked over and over in her mind. Why didn't he turn back when things got dangerous? She couldn't reconcile the idea that her daughter was caught in Caleb's reckless pursuit of something more dangerous than either of them had anticipated. Melanie's voice was raw with accusation whenever she spoke about Caleb. To her, this wasn't just a tragic accident, it was irresponsibility and worse, manipulation. Lily had trusted Caleb. She had followed him, and now she was lost, alone, in the wilderness because of a decision Caleb had made. Melanie's grief twisted into frustration, and as each day passed without answers, that frustration became sharper, more desperate. Every conversation with Evelyn felt like an emotional tug-of-war, each woman trying to hold on to their own version of the truth. But deep down, both of them were struggling with the same thing: guilt. The two mothers stood at opposite ends of a chasm of pain. Evelyn's grief was born of fear for her son's safety, and the hope that somehow he had been tricked, that something had gone wrong beyond his control. Melanie's grief was sharper, filled with anger and the unbearable weight of blame. She felt that if Lily had been more cautious, if Caleb had just taken the right path, things wouldn't have turned out this way. The emotional fracture between the two mothers couldn't be ignored. Tensions flared during the quieter moments of their shared waiting, when neither of them knew what would happen next. Every time they exchanged glances, it was as if they were both seeing the same tragedy, but from completely different angles. Evelyn would hold on to the belief that Caleb was a victim, and Melanie would hold on to the belief that Caleb was responsible for leading them both into this nightmare. The conflicting emotions were palpable. Evelyn wanted to believe Caleb could still be saved, that the truth would eventually surface, and her son would come home. But Melanie, on the other hand, felt a deeper bitterness grow with each unanswered question. Her daughter's innocence had been torn away because of someone else's poor decision-making. As the search continued, the divide between them deepened. Both women were mourning, but they were mourning in different ways, torn between blame and guilt, anger and love. And with each passing day, the fear that neither would find the closure they so desperately needed became more apparent. They were both grieving, but their grief wasn't aligned. Theirs was a fractured bond, a relationship built on a shared loss, but one that seemed to be drifting further apart as they each held on to their own truth. In this moment, there was no clear path forward, not for Caleb, not for Lily, and certainly not for the two mothers. The days wore on, and with each passing hour, the uncertainty seemed to take on a life of its own. As the search expanded into the vast, rugged wilderness of the Adirondacks, the tension among the investigators and the families deepened. Everyone was grasping at straws, searching for any clue, any shred of evidence that would explain what had happened to Caleb and Lily. But with each dead end, the answers slipped farther out of reach. And with every new question, the sense that something was being hidden in the wilderness grew stronger. The investigation was becoming more than just a search for missing teens, it was now a web of unanswered questions. And the silence of the Adirondacks seemed to be hiding the truth, unwilling to give it up. Evelyn and Melanie, each still holding on to their own versions of the story, couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something, that there was more to the situation than anyone was acknowledging. Speculation ran rampant, and each theory felt more unsettling than the last. Was it a drug-induced accident? Had Caleb and Lily's decision to take the Stony Patch edibles clouded their judgment, making them wander into dangerous terrain without realizing how far they'd gone? The idea that the teens, under the influence of cannabis edibles, might have simply lost their way felt terrifying in its own right. Had they stumbled into an area so remote that they couldn't find their way back? The thought that their impaired decision-making had led them to wander deeper into the unforgiving wilderness gnawed at their families' minds. Was this just an unfortunate accident? The more they thought about it, the more it made sense. But even that idea didn't bring comfort, it only added to the dread of the unknown. Then there was the theory that made everyone shiver with unease. Had they been attacked by wildlife? The Adirondacks, though beautiful, were home to black bears, coyotes, and other creatures that could easily overpower an unsuspecting human. Could Caleb and Lily have crossed paths with one of these animals, caught off guard and vulnerable in their secluded campsite? The sight of the abandoned campsite with no signs of struggle but an eerie sense of departure seemed to suggest something more unsettling. The idea that the teens had been ambushed by a predator was hard to swallow, but the more they thought about it, the more it seemed possible. Was it an animal attack, or had something more sinister taken place? But there was an even darker thought lingering in the air, a theory that no one dared to voice aloud, but that everyone felt deep in their gut. What if there was an external threat lurking in the wilderness? Someone or something that had been waiting for Caleb and Lily, who had been watching them from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Who else could be in the Adirondacks so far from the trails? And more importantly, why hadn't they seen anything? The search had covered so much ground, yet the thought of a third party, someone hidden in the vast, dense forest, cast a shadow over every conversation. The presence of tire tracks near the campsite suggested something or someone had been there, but it was all circumstantial. What if Caleb and Lily had come across someone dangerous, someone who had no reason to let them leave? Evelyn couldn't bring herself to accept the idea of human involvement, her maternal instinct still clinging to the belief that her son was a victim of the wilderness, a tragic accident, a bad decision, maybe even nature's cruelty. But Melanie felt differently. Every new piece of evidence, every unanswered question, only reinforced the growing suspicion that Caleb and Lily were victims of something much darker, a human hand at play in the middle of the wilderness. The feeling of being watched weighed heavily on both women. The sense that the wilderness was hiding its secrets, that the teens had walked right into something they didn't see coming, became suffocating. The more they speculated, the more it seemed like the forest was holding on to its secrets, refusing to let them go. There were no answers, only more questions, and with each passing day, the investigation seemed to be pushing them further from the truth. Investigators, now deeply invested in these theories, were working tirelessly to piece together the fragments of the story, but every lead felt like it was leading them in circles. Could Caleb and Lily really have been lost by accident, or had something more sinister happened in those wild woods? Was there a predator lurking, human or animal? Or had the teens made a fatal mistake, wandering into a place too dangerous to survive? Evelyn and Melanie's grief was escalating, their pain intertwined with frustration, knowing they were no closer to finding their children. The wilderness seemed to keep swallowing their questions, keeping its answers locked away. And with every turn, every unanswered question, the sense of something more sinister, something hidden beneath the surface grew. No one could shake the feeling that the Adirondacks weren't just holding on to Caleb and Lily, they were hiding something much darker. And with each new day that passed, that feeling became harder to ignore. Just when it seemed like the search was losing its momentum, a new lead emerged, one that would change the course of the investigation forever. Tire tracks, faint but unmistakable, were found near the abandoned campsite. At first, it seemed like a small, insignificant detail, easily overlooked in the chaos of the dense Adirondack wilderness. But as the investigators inspected them more closely, they realized the tracks were too deliberate, too intact to be a mere coincidence. These weren't the kind of tire marks you'd expect from a random passerby, they were the kind that spoke of a planned presence, someone who had knowingly driven into this isolated area. The question lingered like a shadow: who else could have been out there? And why hadn't anyone seen or heard anything? The discovery of the tire tracks felt like the first crack in the case, a third party, someone who had been involved in some way. The teens hadn't just wandered off, they had encountered something or someone that had made them stray from their path. A new layer of fear settled in the air. If there was someone else out there, someone who had been following them or waiting for them, what did that mean for their safety? Were they still out there watching, waiting to strike again? Then came the discovery that made everyone's heart drop: the broken glasses. It wasn't just any pair of glasses. These were Rhett's glasses, found near a steep ravine, partially buried beneath a pile of wet leaves. The impact of the discovery was immediate. Rhett had been there, near the ravine, the same ravine that could swallow a person whole without a trace. But how had the glasses ended up here, so far from the campsite? Had Caleb fallen near the ravine, unable to stop himself as he lost his footing in the treacherous terrain? Or had there been a confrontation, something that led to Rhett's injury? The thought of a struggle near the ravine, with the teens caught in an unexpected encounter, sent a wave of nausea through the investigators. It suggested that the teens hadn't just gotten lost, they had encountered something dangerous, something that could explain their disappearance. Caleb and Lily, who had gone into the wilderness for an adventure, might have run into someone or something they weren't prepared for. The idea of a violent altercation suddenly seemed very real. With these new discoveries, the investigation took a sharp turn. The focus shifted. This was no longer just about two teens getting lost in the wild. The police began to wonder, had they been attacked? And if so, by who? Were the tire tracks a clue to someone else's involvement? Was it an isolated incident, or had the teens walked into something far more sinister? Investigators scrambled to reframe their search. They expanded the area, now moving toward a broader and more terrifying possibility. That third-party involvement wasn't just likely, it was a chilling reality. There was something hidden in the Adirondacks, something dark, and the further they dug, the more they felt like the woods were hiding its secrets. Evelyn and Melanie, both mothers at the end of their emotional rope, could barely breathe through the pressure of the unknown. The tire tracks were an invitation into a new level of fear, one that made the wilderness feel like a prison, a place where danger could be lurking behind every tree, behind every corner. Evelyn's mind raced. Was it possible that Caleb had been lured into a confrontation, someone waiting for him in the thick woods? Melanie, on the other hand, was consumed with dread, torn between believing her daughter had fallen into a dangerous situation or that something even more insidious had been at play. They were no longer searching for two teens who simply went off trail. They were now searching for answers in a wild, unpredictable world where no one could be trusted, not even the wilderness. What had started as a grief-stricken search for missing children had now become an investigation into something far more complicated, a search for truth in a land that kept its secrets well hidden. The tension between what had been, what was, and what could be was suffocating. Every new clue raised new fears, and the idea that Caleb and Lily had been caught in a web of danger was harder to ignore. The ravine, the tire tracks, the broken glasses, they weren't just random details. They were signs of a deeper, darker story. And with each revelation, the terrifying question lingered: was someone else in those woods, waiting for the right moment? As the investigation deepened, the mounting evidence began to point in a direction no one had anticipated, toward a theory so dark and unexpected it sent a chill down the spines of everyone involved. Up until now, the search for Caleb and Lily had been centered around the idea that they had wandered into the wilderness, made an ill-fated decision to explore beyond their plans. But the discovery of the tire tracks, the tracks that had been left near their abandoned campsite, was forcing the investigators to reconsider everything. The tire tracks weren't just any ordinary markings. They were too distinct, too deliberate to be the result of casual traffic. As the forensic team analyzed the patterns, it became clear that these tracks belonged to specialized vehicles, ones that could navigate the rough, mountainous terrain of the Adirondacks. They weren't the kind of tires typically seen on family campers or recreational vehicles. They were heavy-duty tires used by vehicles built for illegal activity. The type of vehicles typically associated with smuggling operations. It wasn't long before the pieces began to fit together in a way no one had expected. The remote location of the campsite, so far from any established trail or campground, suddenly seemed more strategic. What if Caleb and Lily hadn't just gotten lost? What if they had stumbled across something far darker than they could have ever imagined? Smuggling operations in the remote wilderness, right on the Canadian border just a few miles away, could explain the strange tire tracks and the sense that something was being hidden from the authorities. The thought of smuggling in this otherwise tranquil area felt almost surreal, but as investigators pieced the evidence together, it became disturbingly plausible. The Adirondacks, with its dense forests, rugged mountain paths, and proximity to the Canadian border, was the perfect cover for illegal operations, whether it be human trafficking, drug running, or even weapon smuggling. The tracks, the unexplained silence around the campsite, and the strange circumstances all pointed to one unsettling conclusion. Caleb and Lily had accidentally crossed paths with something dangerous, something they never should have encountered. As the search teams focused on this new possibility, the air grew heavier with fear. The idea that the teens had unknowingly stumbled into a criminal operation was terrifying. Had they seen something they weren't supposed to? Had they become witnesses to something illegal, something that had put their lives in immediate danger? Were they targeted because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time? The emotional weight of this new theory hit Evelyn and Melanie hard. Their children, who had gone into the wilderness with nothing but innocent curiosity, might have found themselves in a situation beyond their control. The idea that criminals might have been lurking in the very same woods they had wandered into was heartbreaking and maddening. Evelyn's mind raced. She couldn't fathom it, her son, caught in the crossfire of a world he had no business being in. Melanie, still holding on to her anger, couldn't help but wonder, had Caleb led Lily right into this danger? The possibility that her daughter had been caught up in a world so far removed from the reality she knew filled her with a sickening dread. The investigators couldn't ignore the possibility that the teens had unknowingly discovered a smuggling route, a route that could lead them to dangerous individuals who wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone who got too close. The remoteness of the location, combined with the rugged terrain, suggested that the smugglers had chosen the perfect spot to hide in plain sight, far from the watchful eyes of law enforcement. The theory of smuggling operations raised more questions than answers. What had Caleb and Lily witnessed? Did they know something they shouldn't have? Were they threatened into silence, or did they try to escape once they realized what was happening around them? As investigators expanded their search, they began to look for signs of criminal activity in the area. The tire tracks were only the beginning. Now they had to find evidence that could confirm the smuggling theory. Drugs, weapons, or even illegal goods could have been hidden in the area, and the search for those items now took priority. Evidence of trafficking, human or otherwise, could have been buried beneath the surface, in caves or abandoned structures hidden deep within the woods. But with every step closer to the truth, the fear that the teens were caught in something far darker became harder to shake. Caleb and Lily weren't just missing, they were now tied to a world they could never have imagined, one that was shadowed by danger, violence, and criminals who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. The wilderness, once seen as an innocent backdrop to an adventure, now loomed like a silent accomplice, a place where innocent lives had been caught in the crossfire of something dangerous and sinister. Evelyn and Melanie, heartbroken, clung to the hope that their children had merely stumbled into the wrong place at the wrong time. But the more they learned, the more they had to face the terrifying possibility that Caleb and Lily had witnessed something they were never meant to see, and it had cost them dearly. The wilderness wasn't just a place of beauty anymore, it was a trap. Days of endless searching in the Adirondacks had left the investigation feeling stagnant, the answers just out of reach. Then, as if pulled from the shadows, a new lead surfaced, a piece of information so unexpected, so unsettling, it sent a chill through the entire team. A tip-off came from a utility worker in Burlington, a small but crucial detail that would change everything. The worker had noticed something strange in one of the local apartment buildings. An apartment with blacked-out windows, a sure sign of someone trying to hide their activity. The tip seemed insignificant at first until they learned that the unit was rented by Viktor Yovanovitch, a name that would soon send shockwaves through the investigation. Viktor's behavior had been increasingly suspicious, and the more the investigators dug into his background, the more unsettling the connections became. The blacked-out windows were the first red flag. No one in the building had ever seen him during the day, just a quick figure passing by, hidden behind the dark curtains. It was as though he had deliberately isolated himself from the world. But that wasn't all. The electricity usage in his apartment was through the roof, far beyond what anyone would expect for a single tenant. The constant hum of power, day and night, suggested something was happening behind those windows, something the outside world wasn't meant to see. It wasn't just the strange behavior, it was Viktor's apparent connection to criminal activity. Investigators traced his movements and uncovered a troubling pattern. He had been tied to small-time smuggling rings, but there were whispers, rumors of something much bigger, an operation that moved goods across borders, hidden under layers of normalcy. There were also connections to human trafficking, and the realization began to sink in him. Viktor wasn't just a lonely tenant with an eccentric lifestyle. He was part of a darker world, a world that Caleb and Lily might have stumbled into unknowingly. As the investigators dug deeper, the weight of this new lead pressed down on them. Viktor had no visible ties to the local community, no friends, no known associates in the area. He had kept to himself an island of secrecy in a quiet neighborhood. The more they learned about him, the more uneasy the team became. Viktor was more than just a suspect, he was a shadowy figure moving within the cracks of a system no one seemed to notice. The admission that he had likely been involved in some form of criminal operation made everything else fall into place. The teen's disappearance, once thought to be an accident, now felt more like a deliberate trap. Had Viktor played a role in luring them into a dangerous game? Was he the one who had pulled them deeper into the wilderness, to a place where no one could hear their cries for help? The tension within the investigation mounted. They began looking into Viktor's background, tracing his movements and uncovering disturbing connections to smuggling routes along the Canadian border, the same border Caleb and Lily had ventured near during their ill-fated trip. The chilling thought began to form. Had they unknowingly crossed paths with Viktor, perhaps encountering him while exploring a remote area, unaware that he was part of something much larger than they could have imagined? As the team moved to question Viktor, the atmosphere turned heavy, suffocating. Viktor was a man unseen, but his presence had left deep impressions everywhere he went. His actions were far from random, he was deliberately hiding in plain sight. And now, as the investigators homed in on his apartment, they couldn't shake the growing feeling that they were on the brink of uncovering something that would send everything they thought they knew spiraling into chaos. In a darkened apartment just a few miles away from where the teens had gone missing, Viktor Yovanovitch sat behind the veil of his blacked-out windows, unaware that the authorities were closing in on him. The once quiet wilderness that Caleb and Lily had wandered into now seemed to have a far more sinister face. Viktor was just the tip of the iceberg, and the deeper they went, the more dangerous the world became. Evelyn's stomach churned as the realization hit. Caleb and Lily weren't just lost. They had accidentally walked into the wrong world, a world of hidden danger and criminal deception. The idea that her son might have been exposed to something so dark, so violent, was unbearable. The more the investigators uncovered, the more they were forced to accept the terrifying truth. This wasn't an accident. Caleb and Lily had stepped into a world that would stop at nothing to protect its secrets. The investigators braced themselves for what was to come. A raid on Viktor's apartment was imminent, and as they prepared for the confrontation, the tension in the air was palpable. Everything hinged on what they would find in those darkened rooms. Would Victor's arrest lead to the truth about what had happened to Caleb and Lily? Or would it open the door to something even darker, something they weren't yet ready to face? The atmosphere was thick with anticipation as the police raid on Viktor Yovanovitch's apartment drew nearer. 4 days, the investigation had moved in fits and starts, but now they had a clear target: the man who had been lurking in the shadows of their search. The weight of the moment settled over the officers like a heavy cloud. What would they find? Was Victor truly the key to unlocking the mystery of Caleb and Lily's disappearance? Or would they uncover a nightmare far darker than they had imagined? When the tactical team finally breached the door to Victor's apartment, the air seemed to crackle with tension. The apartment was eerily quiet, the blacked-out windows blocking any trace of daylight. It was exactly what they had expected: dark, isolated, a place where secrets were hidden beneath layers of silence and shadows. The police moved quickly, clearing each room with military precision. But when they reached the back room, what they discovered sent a shockwave of shock and disbelief through the entire team. There, in the cold, soundproofed room, was Lily Harper, alive but barely recognizable. Her body was gaunt, her skin pale and drawn tight across her bones. Malnourished, barely able to lift her head, she lay in a corner, her eyes wide with terror as the officers rushed to her side. The moment Lily was found, the collective breath of everyone in the room seemed to stop, the disbelief washing over them like a wave. She was alive, a tiny flicker of hope in a case that had seemed hopeless for so long. But the joy of her discovery was tinged with horror. As the officers carefully helped her to her feet, it became clear that this was no simple case of a runaway teen. The room where she had been kept was soundproof, a prison cell designed to keep its occupant isolated from the world. There was no sign of a struggle, but the absence of light, the cold, sterile air, and the lack of any human interaction painted a terrifying picture of Lily's months of captivity. It was clear that she had been locked away for a purpose, one that was far darker than anyone had imagined. As Victor was taken into custody, the layers of the mystery began to peel back, revealing a far more sinister plot than anyone had prepared for. Victor wasn't just a recluse with strange behavior, he was a key player in a human trafficking ring. The evidence began to pile up, and investigators soon realized that Lily hadn't been kidnapped on a whim. She had been specifically targeted. She had been held against her will, meant for a life of exploitation, her body and future sold to the highest bidder in the shadowy world of human trafficking. The arrest of Viktor Yovanovitch uncovered a twisted network of criminal activity, where the innocent were taken and hidden in plain sight, in apartments like Victor's, and in places that no one would ever suspect. The revelation sent shockwaves through the team. Lily had been trapped in a nightmare, far removed from the teens' innocent adventure that had led them into the wilderness. And yet, despite all the horror, she was alive. Her strength and will to survive had kept her from the fate that so many others might have suffered. But just as the relief of finding Lily alive began to settle in, a new wave of questions crashed over the investigation. Where was Caleb? The pieces of the puzzle didn't quite fit together. Victor's arrest had brought some clarity, but it had also left more unanswered questions, especially about Caleb's fate. Had he been taken by the same people? Was he still out there, hidden somewhere in the wild? Or had he suffered a far darker end? The emotional toll of the discovery hit hard. Evelyn and Melanie, having clung to their fears, now found themselves facing the bittersweet truth that Lily was alive, but Caleb was still missing. They were torn between the joy of finding Lily and the agonizing uncertainty surrounding Caleb's fate. Evelyn's heart swelled with relief that her son's fate hadn't yet been sealed, but the agony of not knowing where he was, or what had happened to him, threatened to consume her. Melanie, too, was torn as the discovery of Lily opened a door to both hope and horror. She held on to the belief that Caleb might still be out there, but the more they uncovered about Victor and his network, the more that hope began to feel fragile, like glass ready to shatter. In the wake of Victor's arrest, the team knew they had only scratched the surface of something much darker and more widespread. They couldn't shake the feeling that they were only seeing one part of a much larger and more dangerous world. The Adirondacks, once a symbol of adventure and nature's beauty, now stood as a silent accomplice to the horrors hidden in its depths. As Lily was taken to safety, her body weakened but her spirit still holding on, the search for Caleb continued with renewed intensity. But as they prepared to follow the trail further, one question haunted them all. What had Victor done to Caleb? And could they uncover the truth before it was too late? The days after Victor Yovanovitch's arrest felt like an endless whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The relief of Lily's survival was overshadowed by the nagging, unrelenting weight of Caleb's disappearance. For every answer Victor gave, 100 more questions swirled in the minds of those still desperately searching for the truth. Victor, sitting in the cold interrogation room, was finally ready to speak. His eyes were vacant, almost indifferent, as he recounted the horrifying details of what had happened, how he had captured Lily, how he had killed Caleb in the woods. But as the details spilled from his lips, a new gut-wrenching reality set in. Rhett's body was still unaccounted for. Victor, in a chilling turn, refused to disclose where he had left Caleb's remains. The silence hung heavy in the room as he coldly recounted his actions, refusing to show even the smallest hint of remorse for what he had done. His stoic expression made it clear that he had no intention of giving any more than what was absolutely necessary. For Evelyn, every word Victor spoke felt like a knife twisting in her heart. She had found Lily, she had held her daughter-in-law to be close, but Caleb's body was still out there, somewhere buried in the cold, unforgiving wilderness. The weight of that unfinished pain was suffocating. Every time Victor spoke, it was as though Caleb was slipping further from her grasp, lost in the vastness of the woods. But Victor's refusal to disclose Caleb's final resting place, his cold indifference, was more than just a personal torment for the families. It was a deliberate act of control, a way to keep the grieving parents forever wondering, forever searching. The final steps of the case had brought no relief, only a horrible new reality. They had the truth of what had happened, but they were still left in the dark about the most important part, their son's final moments, his final resting place. As the case closed, the police filed away the details of the trafficking ring, and Victor was taken into custody, but the sense of closure that should have come with justice felt empty. Evelyn's grief, already raw, now deepened. She couldn't stop wondering, where is Caleb? And would she ever get to say goodbye? The harsh truth settled in the pain of knowing he was gone was bad enough, but to be left without answers, to have the mystery of where her son lay in the earth unresolved, was a wound that could never fully heal. Would she ever have the chance to bring him home? Or would his body remain hidden, forever just out of reach? For Melanie there was a different kind of devastation. She was still struggling to reconcile the horror of what had happened to her daughter with the devastating knowledge that Lily was the only one left to speak for Caleb. Her daughter had suffered unimaginable trauma, but the uncertainty around Caleb's fate was something that haunted her day and night. The thought that her daughter's life had been taken while Caleb had fought to protect her left a deep hole of grief. Was Lily the one who had to carry the weight of what happened, and would Caleb's body ever be found to give the family peace? But there was one piece of hope: the slow but steady recovery of Lily. Though her body was bruised and malnourished, and her soul scarred by everything she had endured, she was alive. The relief of knowing she would survive, that she could heal physically and emotionally, brought some solace. She could share the truth of what had happened, and in time, perhaps she could find some measure of peace. Yet even in this recovery there was an overwhelming sadness. Lily's future would never be the same, her world forever marked by the violence and terror she had lived through. And Caleb, her fiancé, was gone. As the weeks passed, investigators pieced together the last parts of the case. They dismantled the smuggling ring, arrested several key figures, and hoped that some part of Victor's life would help explain what had happened. But for Evelyn and Melanie, the truth was incomplete. It wasn't enough to know that Victor was behind bars. They had to know where Caleb was, to have something they could bury. The emotional toll of the unknown was a relentless force, a gnawing reminder that not every case, no matter how close to resolution, brings closure. Lily's testimony had brought them closer to the truth, but it had also opened up new, darker avenues of grief. She would live with the horror of the Adirondacks, and with the pain of losing Caleb, her love and her protector, for the rest of her life. And for Evelyn, the question remained, would she ever be able to bury her son? Would she be left with only the memory of Caleb and the absence of his final rest? No amount of justice, no amount of legal closure, would give her back what she had lost. And until they found Caleb's body, the final chapter of their story would remain unwritten. In the weeks following Viktor Yovanovitch's arrest, the air was heavy with both relief and sorrow. Lily Harper, though physically freed from her captor, still carried the marks of her trauma, her body gaunt, her eyes hollow with the weight of what she had survived. Every night, she relived the horrors of the Adirondacks, the fear, the violence, the isolation. The road to healing was long and uncertain. Doctors reassured her that her body would recover, but the mental scars ran much deeper. Every noise, every shadow, seemed to bring back memories of Victor's grip, of the soundproof room where she had been locked away. Her mind, forever haunted by the images of Caleb's death, the struggle and the invisible chains she had worn, could not easily escape the horrors she had endured. Evelyn MacArthur sat beside her in silence most days, watching her daughter-in-law-to-be try to heal, knowing that Lily's recovery would never be complete. Her grief for Caleb was an almost unbearable weight on her heart. She had found her son's fiancé, but her son was still missing, his final resting place still unknown. Every day without closure was another day that the pain of loss gnawed at her soul. Evelyn's grief was not just for Caleb's death, but for the complete absence of answers. She had no body to bury, no place to mourn him properly. The Adirondack wilderness, once a place of wonder and beauty for her family, had become the silent grave of her son. Caleb had been out there somewhere, trapped in a world of violence, and Evelyn was left to wonder, where had he been left? What had Victor done to him? The not knowing, the incomplete truth, was a wound that would never heal. As the investigation continued, Evelyn's world felt like it was spiraling. She couldn't get her son back, and no amount of justice for Victor could bring Caleb home. The pain of uncertainty was like a constant companion, shadowing her steps. She tried to console Lily, tried to hold on to the faint hope that Caleb's body would one day be found, but even she was starting to lose faith. She feared that Caleb's final moments, the answer to his fate, would remain locked away in the wilderness, like a cruel secret the land refused to give up. Meanwhile, Lily, though physically recovering, was still trapped in the web of her own emotions. The guilt of surviving weighed on her like a heavy shroud, and she couldn't escape the thought that if she had only tried harder, fought harder, maybe Caleb would still be alive. She could barely speak about him without the image of his final moments haunting her. The memory of seeing him murdered, unable to save him, was a scar that would stay with her forever. The families were left broken: Lily, who had survived, and Evelyn, whose son was still lost. The Adirondacks, that vast and untamed wilderness, had taken Caleb's life and left unanswered questions in its wake. As the police continued to piece together the details of the trafficking ring, the ring of criminals who had orchestrated this nightmare. The one piece that remained out of reach was Caleb's final resting place. The wilderness had swallowed him whole, leaving only fragments of the truth scattered in its depths. And so, Evelyn sat beside Lily, day after day, both women trapped in their own private hells, unable to truly heal. The dark secrets of the Adirondacks were buried beneath layers of trees, mountains, and silent rivers, a mystery that no one could fully unravel. The questions remained unanswered. What had happened to Caleb in those final moments? Who else was out there in the woods, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the wrong person to cross their path? As the days turned into weeks and the weeks turned into months, the mystery of Caleb's disappearance loomed larger than ever. The Adirondack wilderness was no longer a place of beauty, it had become a place of sorrow, a reminder of what had been lost and what would never be found. The search for answers had ended in so much uncertainty, and as Evelyn and Lily tried to move forward, the past still haunted them, wrapped in the cold, dark silence of the mountains that had taken so much. The wilderness remained as silent as ever, and with each passing day, the questions about Caleb's final fate seemed more likely to stay unanswered forever. And in that silence, one thing was painfully clear. The truth, for better or worse, was forever hidden in the deep woods of the Adirondacks. As the mystery of Caleb's fate remains unsolved, we ask you to join us in continuing to seek the truth. If you found this story as chilling and heartbreaking as we have, please hit subscribe so you can stay updated on the latest developments. Your support helps us keep uncovering the stories that need to be told, and together we might just find the answers we're all searching for. If you have any thoughts or theories of your own, don't hesitate to drop a comment below. We want to hear from you. Your voice could be the missing piece to solving the case. Thank you for watching, and remember, the truth is out there, we just need to keep looking.